Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Annelie de Villiers, and I'd like to start by acknowledging the traditional owners of this land, the Wurundjeri people of the Kulin Nation, and pay my respects to their elders, past, present, and into the future. I acknowledge and pay my respect also to the old people who have been removed and later returned to country, and particularly those who are yet to be returned. I'm Annelie, and this is Win. We work at the eScholarship Research Centre, which is located here at the University of Melbourne. And Chris Wilson is here today as well, and he's flown all the way from Adelaide to be presenting with us as well. Oh, not that far?
It's not that far. Yeah.
Did you want to introduce yourself quickly?
Yeah, sure. Hi, I'm Chris. Dr. Chris Wilson.
Yeah, that's recently doctor, so that's pretty cool.
You can get used to this. I'm Ngarrindjeri. I'm a senior lecturer in the Office of Indigenous Strategy Engagement at Flinders University. I've grown up in Adelaide, that's where I live, and I call myself Ngarrindjeri, I'm Nungo, and Aboriginal, so wear many hats. I'm here today to, on behalf of the project team, but particularly the Ngarrindjeri Regional Authority, who are the partners, or one of the partners for the ARC linkage, and now there's a lead. I was initially involved in there as a project partner at the beginning of that, and just recently, after finishing the PhD, come back into it. So I'll be here talking about the Ngarrindjeri experience in repatriation.
So Win and myself will go first and kind of provide some context for the research project before Chris talks about the community experience. Win, do you want to take us away?
So the eScholarship Research Centre is a partner on the Return, Reconcile, Renew project that we're here to talk about. Our presentation and Chris's should go for about half an hour, give or take, leaving plenty of room for questions or afternoon tea afterwards. Maybe we should start asking what is an archivist, but I expect we're coming to the end of this week, we are all quite aware of that, but an archivist is the person responsible for preserving, organising and providing access to material, often unpublished material. So that can be anything from business records through to bits and bytes of audiovisual material. In the case of this project, it was a bit of everything. First off, I think we should be thanking our community partners for granting permission to come and talk to you today. We'll talk more about our partners a little later on. When we get our presentation up and running, you'll see that there's no culturally sensitive information in it and no images of ancestral remains, but the content could still be upsetting given the nature of the subject. So who are we? The eScholarship Research Centre, or the ESRC, is a social and cultural informatics research centre within the Melbourne Uni Library here. We focus on archival science, metadata and contextual information. Our research aims to advance the discovery and the interpretation of archival records, published literature and research data for the benefit of the academic community, but especially for the greater public good. Annelie and I are disciples, if that's the right word, of Gavin McCarthy. It probably isn't the right word, but it'll do. Who's the director of the eScholarship Research Centre, who unfortunately couldn't be at this session today, but I'm starting to think he did that deliberately just to keep Annelie and I on our toes. Here we go. Thank you very much.
So you get to see our pretty slides.
It's the policy, you can skip ahead. It's the policy of the Australian government to support the repatriation of Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander ancestral remains from overseas institutions and private holders, and ancestral remains and secret sacred objects from major Australian museums so that they can be returned to their community of origin. The policy and supporting Indigenous repatriation program is administered by the Ministry for the Arts, which got a mention before. To date, over 1,400 ancestral remains and over 1,400 sacred objects have been returned to communities from within Australian collections with help from the domestic program. And under the international program, to date, there's been more than 1,300 ancestral remains that have returned home to Australia from overseas. These remains have come from all sorts of places, but especially from the US and from Canada, from the UK, from France and from Germany, but from lots of other countries as well. To talk a little bit about repatriation itself and the history of repatriation, the theft and export of ancestral remains took place from the time of colonisation and was no secret. A quick search in Trove, like this one, turns up hundreds of articles, and it's always surprising and shocking to realise that the average person has no idea about any of this, largely due to the Great Australian Silence, which continues to surround all of us. The remains were sought after by scientists and collectors for all sorts of reasons, and none of them good. Predominantly, the scientists sought access to the remains in order to prove that their own preconceived notions that Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people were somehow lesser. These ancestors were removed from their land, which, as we know, is completely at odds with Indigenous Australian beliefs of maintaining the link between ancestral spirits and the land. And to add insult to injury, these remains were then used in order to dehumanise Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people even further. It's estimated that thousands of remains are still held in institutions overseas, in addition to the thousands that have already been repatriated. About the project, thank you. The Return, Reconcile, Renew project has run from 2013 onwards and has brought together researchers and repatriation officers to build a virtual knowledge keeping place that supports repatriation efforts, particularly for our community partners. That's CALAC, the Nurrunjeri Regional Authority from down near Adelaide, and GBK of the Torres Strait. These are three very geographically separated groups. The project supported repatriation in three main ways. Firstly, by recording stories of community members about the importance of returning their old people in the form of community histories. Secondly, by building a keeping place for public and private information. And thirdly, by doing research about the removal and the repatriation of old people. We at the ESRC are especially involved in the second point about building the knowledge base, and we'll be talking about that today, now. So since 2013, we've been building, in partnership with other members of the team, a virtual keeping place for public and private information related to repatriation. Through this, we mainly wanted to accomplish two things. First, to support repatriation officers like Neil in their repatriation efforts, and secondly, to educate the broader public about repatriation itself, the importance of repatriation to reconciliation to people in Australia but also all over the world. In order to achieve these two aims, we needed two very different types of information. We needed culturally sensitive information to support the repatriation officers, and then at the same time we also needed information that was able to be made available to the public in order to educate. So how did we do this? We created different means of making the information available. The information that we've been told is okay to be made public has been included in a public website. The website sets out to educate the broader community about the importance of repatriation, and the information within it is told from the perspectives of our 3 community partner organisations. I'll talk about the website now for a minute, and talk about how we hope it will be used and the sorts of information contained in it, the sorts of public information contained in it, before Annelie leaps in and talks more about the private archives that we've also been creating. So the website, here we are, this is the homepage. It's still in draft form, and it's set to be published in the not too distant future, we hope. The date is to be confirmed. Through the website, we'll be providing information relating to both the taking and the return of old people, and we'll be providing resources that support the repatriation activities of any community worldwide. Within this website, CALAC, for example, here it is. This is still a work in progress, as you can see. On pages like this, it will describe the repatriation efforts of different organisations, talk about their role. This will be in their voice, so the words will be their words. Maps of areas, related resources. There'll also be links to the organisation and to other relevant organisations and other resources, other published resources, and whatever else. It's worth pointing out that this website and the project in general was created with scalability in mind. So right now we've only got 3 communities, we've got 3 communities involved, but it would be fantastic when we go a step beyond that, and we're ready for it to be expanded. There's space for more communities to fit in, and we're hoping that that will eventually happen. There's also another entryway to the resources in the site. It's a searchable online database which will contain information and records, all sorts of records relating to repatriation and the communities and the different individuals involved in the story. What this site won't have is direct access to any culturally sensitive material. And I think that's Annelie's cue.
Oh, sure. Great, thanks Win. As you may have seen as it flew past was a greyed out box. So rather than a button stating that you can have a look at information related to ancestral remains, we have had a unclickable or unrespondable button created, which is greyed out, which says ancestral remains on it, but says this is limited access. In reality, it'll actually not even be on that version of the database. It's completely secure. But what we were aiming to do was, we realized that as we took out the sensitive information, the story once again became one of the colonists. It became one which told of the people who removed the remains. So what we tried to do is to, again, just put the ancestral remains and their stories and the stories of the communities at the centre, even though some of that information can't be accessed, just to not silence that story again. Clicking again. So what we've done, as we all know, there's no perfect system to deal with the access issues that are required when you work in this space. But we've got the public website, which won't have any sensitive information at all or any access to it, just in order to be entirely certain that it's secure. So the private information will actually be held separately in these databases. The Narrandjeri Regional Authority, CALAC, which represents the Kimberley, and GBK, which represents the Torres Strait, they each actually have their own database which contains information related to their ancestral remains. IATSIS will be a safekeeping place for the entirety of the information. IATSIS is actually involved in this project, which is really great. So that's just an additional safety net for the longevity of this information, because projects by their nature have a finite time in which they can run and limited funding, which is one of the dangers of this type of work, these types of projects. They really should be programs. So the private archive, everyone likes to access their information in different ways. The repatriation officers of each community have quite different different levels of access to technical capabilities, whether that be through limitations of internet up in the Torres Strait or otherwise. I think Neil Carter's computer cables, he's up in the Calac, recently got eaten by some ants. So you never know. So we've got physical copies which are going to be printed out and bound securely within our office, but we'll be giving that to each community. We'll give them the database itself with instructions in order to keep adding information. The database at the back end of all of this is the ORM, the Online Heritage Resource Manager, which was developed by the ESRC since, Kirsten, do we know? A long time ago. Okay, beautiful, thank you. And then in addition, there'll be an offline copy of the HTML, the full set of information related to each community at each community, so that there is a user-friendly way for a repatriation officer to sit down with a community and talk about their repatriation efforts with fully accessible sensitive information in a secure form to refer to. The next one, please. Okay, so the offline website. I'm just going to show you an example of what one of the pages looks like. I think this, yeah. Anyway, this page, the next page is an example only. It's got absolutely no information in it. It's just a template of what kind of headlines and what kind of information is in it. It's incredibly redacted. It's probably an example of what you'd get from the government if you were to ask for a piece of information about yourself. Can you press space again or something? So what we write is a meaningful title. Ancestral remain from, so provenance is incredibly important. Alternative names are the various catalogue numbers which are assigned to them over time. Physical description, and a description from each and every catalogue, each and every diary entry which relates to that ancestral remain. Timeline of events, what's happened, have they been repatriated, who was involved along the way, from the historic people who were involved in their removal, through to which group they're part of, the milestones that happened along the way, for example, the smoking ceremony or their journey home, who was with them, which organisations were involved, and the places which the remains were related to as well. Can I next one, please? Okay, so another example is a historic person. Erik Newberg, anyone who's worked up in the Kimberley will probably be very aware of his work and his legacy. So he is linked to the ancestral remains that he removed. Then he's also related to the scientific expedition that he was part of, the museum that commissioned his work, and any resources which we used in the creation of this entry. And if you want to find out any further information, that's where you can go. So each one of these as well, if you click on more information, it'll have information related to how to find that particular resource. Okay, so this is a visualization of the related database, the ORM, which is at the back of the website. I'm sorry guys, you've seen this before, haven't you? So what's happened through, the last 3-4 years of data entry, data curation, is that the entries in the database have naturally pulled apart and become closely related, depending on their relationships within the database. So the Nurundjeri are up the top, The Torres Strait are here and the Kimberley are there. And this is fairly useful for gaining a bit of an overview and insight into the information that's in the database. But each dot corresponds to a key resource, legislation, an ancestral remain, a historic person, a place, etc. And the really useful part of this is, even though the three communities are disparate in terms of geography, there is a lot in common. Whether it's, you know, the British Museum, which held remains from each of the three communities. You, for example, could look at that and then go, oh, this is a great opportunity for collaboration, to put in a joint or to learn from each other when submitting a repatriation request. So this is just an example of, if you look at one particular remain, which was removed by Erik Newberg, went to Etnografiska Museet, I don't know how to say it, and was repatriated. Here's the event of the repatriation and where they were sent to. So we were lucky enough this year or last year to receive further funding. So it's now a LEAF project, which is, as you can see there, Linkage, Infrastructure, Equipment and Facilities project, and that will enable us to actually do more work into the underlying infrastructure of this database and this project, which is an exciting opportunity. And that's it from us. Thank you so much.
No worries, thank you. I just wanted to, I guess, formally acknowledge Wiradjuri and the Kulin Nation, and just thank you for having me here today. But as I said, I'm representing, you know, my community, so I really want to acknowledge Professor Darryl Rigney, who's the Dean at the Office of Indigenous Strategy Engagement at Flinders University. Also acknowledge Luke Trevorrow, Grant Rigney, Uncle Moogie, and Laurie Rankin Jr., sorry, and Associate Professor Steve Hemming. And we've all been kind of working collectively on repatriation for many years now. I started as an honours student about 13 years ago. You know, through Flinders University, wanted to learn more about my mob and my culture, my identity, and the kind of colonial history as well. So that initially got me involved in repatriation, because at the time, Ngarrindjeri had just received over 300 old people from overseas, and the National Museum was helping with that. So an opportunity for me, I guess, to work with my community in a repatriation event, which at that time was Museum Victoria was negotiating with the Ngarrindjeri, repatriating what they had there in terms of our old people. So the presentation here is, I guess, from all of us. So just want to extend those acknowledgements. Again, just acknowledging, you know, the Kulin Nation, but acknowledging other community members here today, the elders, and also young people. I should probably also mention that images here, some of the elders have passed on, so my apologies for not mentioning that before. And these three elders here that are up on the screen are the three that I've particularly worked with for the last 13 years who've now passed on, so it's quite hard to look at that. But Uncle Tom Trevorrow was the chair of the Ngarrindjeri Heritage Committee. Uncle Matt Rigney had many roles, but is Professor Darryl Rigney's father. And Uncle George Trevorrow as well, who was the Rupli at that time for the Ngarrindjeri. So in the last 5 years, Ngarrindjeri has lost a lot of elders and leadership. So there's been a kind of reconfiguration around the Ngarrindjeri Regional Authority and I guess other people stepping up to roles. So it's been quite difficult at the moment. I've just kind of come back in the last year, realising that, I need to help, with my community and their efforts. But there's also other issues going on, like native title coming, close to. I know that Steve and Darryl and others have been in meetings in court and stuff like that, but treaty discussions as well. So there's all sorts going on. So repatriation is one of those, I think, which can be you know, it is quite emotional, and it always has been for me, but one in which I can reconnect with my mob and the community to do something for healing. And it's also given me an opportunity to you know, to work with elders like Uncle Tom and that when they were here, and be able to learn about where my family, you know, kind of sits in that whole, you know, kind of colonial story of our shared history. And I've learnt a lot, and you know, I've learned a lot through the process, not just about the old people or what's in the archives, but kind of the connections with my family, you know, and you know, some of those have gone, some of those were Ngarrindjeri Anzacs, you know, I guess I'm a descendant from a history of whaling along that coast, and I've taken Ngarrindjeri women to Kangaroo Island, and you know, realising that is, you know, quite confronting for me. I could just imagine, you know, what it could be for some of, you know, my family members who don't have, I guess, an education, and not too sure how to manage, I guess, those kind of those feelings. So, I guess what I'm trying to say here is, you know, it is emotional. It's part of the history. There's trauma associated with this, as we know. It's real and living for us, and you know, it really frustrates me, and I know it's frustrated Uncle Tom and others that yet we have people like Uncle Moogie, that like Neil Carter up in Calac and that who can't even get funded to, you know, appropriately funded to do things like this in the community, and it takes grants like ARC Linkage Grant and people like Cressida and Linden and others working on this to be able to bring that together. So just wanting to acknowledge the importance of these types of projects. So I think this has already been said. There's all the project partners. So Steve has kindly put this together for us all, but you can just see all the partners involved in the project there. Also Te Papa, yeah, it's really, you know, good for somebody like me as an early career researcher as well, and you know, culturally to be able to connect with other communities and other researchers who are out there leading in the field. So it's been a good experience. Leaf grant, I think that's already been mentioned. This is Ngarrindjeri Rui, and this is kind of an image of the Kurong or the Kurank, where a lot of the burials were taken from. A lot of the old people were taken from these sand dunes, but also, you know, along the riverbanks. Yeah, I guess there's about 400 Ngarrindjeri old people sitting at Camp Kurong at the moment, waiting to be reburied. We've had 3 or 4 repatriation events. I haven't been involved in all of them. But we know the South Australian Museum has around 1,000, if not even more, maybe 3,000 old people still in their collection. So, and I know that there's negotiations been happening at the moment, you know, between the community, state government, and the museum for, you know, to try and, you know, start that process. So, yeah, I guess it's been taking time. I guess, you know, in terms of for Ngarrindjeri, and certainly, you know, for some of the elders I've worked with, it's all about well-being, you know, resolving some of that past history, the trauma, and being able to put to rest the old people, but, you know, to give some peace there for justice, and so forth. So it's quite difficult in terms of trying to organise, you know, all the issues around how, you know, where do old people go, and, you know, if people aren't named, if there's no provenance, then, you know, how do you deal with that? So those negotiations have, you know, been going on for decades. Certainly the issue about having old people back has been going on ever since they were taken for Ngarrindjeri. But, you know, with some of those elders who were really involved, who've passed on now, it's, you know, I guess it takes time for others to get in the skills and to be able to continue that. And certainly I want to acknowledge the women as well, who have been involved in Ngarrindjeri women, like Annie Ellen Trevorrow and some of the other women, Alice Rigney and so forth, who help with preparing for the reburials. So you know, they help do the baskets, but also, you know, bringing some of the younger women together as well has been really important for them. This is just showing you just one of the reburials. This looks like it's from Panka, which is, I think, one of the first reburials we did in 2006. And this is with the National Museum of Australia. and Flinders University Archaeology Department, the Ngarrindjeri Heritage Committee at that time. So I think this is showing the or the some of the development of that. So this is for the Ngarrindjeri. Yep. Oh no. Yes.
I think this is all of them.
All of them? Okay.
As of a few months ago.
Okay. So I won't talk to that because you guys are the ones who've developed this. But Steve's obviously got in there to show that. I guess the kind of approach that we have is the Yanamarui approach, or Yaramarui approach. So that's speaking as country. It's a way in which we do assessments, cultural heritage assessments, but just in terms of community wellbeing overall. Some of you would be familiar with Tyndale, and certainly I was, working along the Murray in terms of some of those records, and that's where I started to find more information about my family and connections down in Encounter Bay and in the Coorong. So obviously there's a lot of records there that in the South Australian Museum. This is showing the Museum Victoria repatriation. So you see at the top the 74 old people in those totes up there being handed back. So that was my first experience working with with community and a museum in this type of way, repatriation. So and I documented that with film and audio, some of that with audio, but also took photographs. So you can see on the right there Uncle Morgie Sumner and Uncle Tom Trevorrow as well performing ceremony at Museum Victoria. I won't really talk to that. I guess at the moment, Annie Eunice Aston is the chair of the Ngarrindjeri Regional Authority, so there's a new leadership for Ngarrindjeri, and as I mentioned, there's treaty and NAD title and other discussions going on at the moment, so people have been working through that, but I guess the next stage is for the new leadership to help to work through repatriation, reburials as part of healing for community. Just showing you some of the healing programs. I'll probably leave it there, I think. It's got about 5 minutes left, so he's showing. Oh, sorry. But important. This is what I'm trying to get to. So this is Auntie Ellen Trevorrow on the left here, working with some of the other aunties, and you see in the middle just some of the platform burials. So Ngarrindjeri had platform burials. So there weren't just burials in the ground, but also smoked as well on platforms. So it's just been really important for Ngarrindjeri to be able to to continue those practices, for other young people like myself to work with the elders to do that. So it's been really important. So I guess just on behalf of the Ngarrindjeri Regional Authority, just want to acknowledge the ARC repatriation project, conference organisers, and also Wiradjuri and Kulin Nation as well for having us. So thank you.
But we'll try and drill down into that and look at the collectors, who collected it and where, and if we can get more information about which community the remains have actually come from. So that's one of the research outcomes of this. Another one is pooling all of the information. So for instance, we may have museum catalogues from all over the world, bringing them all together in the one spot as they relate to the three community groups, and sharing that sort of archival research and information. So I guess it'll be an online repository as well as a hard copy repository. The other thing is also assisting communities in the repatriation process where we can through that documentation. And the documentation is really important because many people don't want remains going back to country if they're not from there. So there's some of the outcomes. In terms of the academic outcomes, which people also include, we have a repatriation compendium coming out. We have the online repatriation community guide. So we're sharing the experiences of this and 20 or 30 years of experience in the repatriation space from the combined team with other communities. So what are the repatriation processes? What can you do? Who are the organisations you can seek funding for? So all of the who, what, where, when and why type things as an outcome, and that's to assist other Aboriginal people and communities where repatriation is something very new. We've traditionally done reburials and ceremonies for the dead, like we saw today with Dr. Joe Goombala. So that's part of Aboriginal culture. But returning Aboriginal people that have been stolen, taken away, wasn't traditionally part of Aboriginal culture, and something that we're working through those processes. So they're some of the outcomes of the project today. I had a couple of comments about the presentation. So Chris, thank you very much for sharing that. And it was good to see some of the old people that we've worked with over the years in your presentation. It's good to see lots of young people stepping up. This is more of a comment from the University of Melbourne. I'm now chair of the Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander Cultural Heritage Oversight Committee at the University of Melbourne. In Victoria, there was a recent legislative change where all of the remains in Victoria now are the responsibility of the Victorian Aboriginal Heritage Council. The Heritage Council is now working with Museum Victoria to repatriate remains to other communities. I know Melbourne Museum are keen to get repatriations going, the rest of the Nurrungiri repatriations going. From the university's perspective, we handed over in 2 or 3 separate lots the Murray Black collection. So the Murray Black collection is very poorly provenanced. So the university has made a commitment to assist in provenancing that particular collection. Lots of research was done about 8 years ago through the archives, but the university has made a commitment to make sure that any archives and resources, any archives that relate to the Murray Black collection will be accessible by communities in the repatriation process. So I can personally make that commitment to the Nurrungiri. And we will work with the Victorian Aboriginal Heritage Council and the museum to ensure that you have as much information about that particular collection as possible during the repatriation process. Well, this is another outcome of this project. Sorry to take over. It's another outcome of the project because by pooling all of this information from dispersed collections, it may not only relate to the Nurrungiri or others, it might solve a puzzle for other communities. Where we don't have enough information, where it might just say South Australia, we're looking at, the South Australians might want to work out and have a state repository. In Victoria, with the unprovenanced remains from Victoria, in particular a collection from Melbourne University, it was reburied in Kings Park, 38 unprovenanced remains from Victoria. So that was the first in Australia that ever happened. And also we've worked quite a number of years on a national resting place. So you can Google National Resting Place, Department of Arts, and there's progress in having a national resting place in Canberra in the Parliamentary Triangle. So that report came out 2 years ago. We're really pushing for that. So that's something Aboriginal people have been asking for the last 20, 25 years, a proper resting place and a memorial site.
The question I'd like to ask is, I've been camping to the Coorong, I've driven past it so many times, and those places where you go to repatriate, what kind of pushback do you get from people who aren't on board with this process, i.e., business owners, people who want to plan? Because I know there's been some plans for golf courses and all sorts, and it's seen as a bit of a playground for non-Aboriginal people, but it's a homeland for Nurrungiri.
Yeah, I think over the years, people like Uncle Tom and others have built up relationships with local councils and the state government as well with Kung Ngarrindjeri agreements. So using those as a formal kind of process and way to work with people to have real outcomes for the community. So a lot of the Coorong areas, national parks, all of that's under native title. Well, there's a claim in for Ngarrindjeri and others for native title there, and the state in the last couple of years there's been treaty negotiations as well, and that's helped to strengthen Ngarrindjeri people's connection with some of those areas, and then to help make decisions about where old people will go, because at the moment it's yeah, it is dependent on some of the land and where people go and so forth. With the first reburials, we reburied in the same place, but on the area that they came from. So where it said Panka, you know, Uncle Tom and others had chosen a place that was appropriate because obviously it's, you know, some of that land's cleared, and Panka was over on an island actually crossing the Coorong, so we had to go over in the boat. But they chose a place that was suitable and that was going to be well protected as well. So yeah, I guess the Ngarrindjeri agreements have been really, I guess, the key way in which Ngarrindjeri worked with local people, councils and state governments. Yeah.